Inflation last year was 3.4%. That's the official number, the one they announce on television, the one the Federal Reserve uses to justify their policies, the one your employer points to when explaining why your raise was only 2%. There's just one problem. It's a lie. Not an error, not a miscalculation, a deliberate, systematic deception designed to hide how much of your purchasing power is being stolen every single year. And once you understand how the lie works, you'll never trust an inflation number again. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is the number everyone uses to measure inflation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates it by tracking the prices of a basket of goods and services that supposedly represents what typical American households buy: food, housing, transportation, medical care, education. They add it all up, compare it to last year, and announce the percentage change. Simple, right? Except the methodology has been changed dozens of times since 1980, and every single change has made the number smaller. The first trick is called substitution. Here's how it works. If the price of beef goes up by 20%, but the price of chicken only goes up by 5%, the BLS assumes consumers will switch from beef to chicken. So instead of recording a 20% increase in meat prices, they record something closer to 5%. The logic sounds reasonable on the surface. People do substitute cheaper goods when prices rise. But think about what this actually means. The government is measuring the cost of maintaining a declining standard of living, not the cost of buying what you used to buy, the cost of accepting less. Your grandparents could afford beef. You can afford chicken. Your kids will afford rice. And at every stage, the inflation number will show moderate increases because the index keeps substituting down. The CPI doesn't measure whether you can maintain your lifestyle. It measures how gracefully you can accept its erosion. The second trick is called hedonics. This is where it gets truly insidious. The BLS adjusts prices based on quality improvements. If a new computer costs $1,000 but has twice the processing power of last year's model, they don't record a stable price. They record a price decrease. In their calculation, you effectively paid $500 for the same amount of computing power. The official inflation number goes down even though you still spent $1,000 at the register. Apply this logic to everything. Your car costs more, but it has better safety features, so the adjusted price shows smaller increases. Your phone costs more, but it has a better camera, so the adjusted price is lower. Your health insurance costs more, but the plan covers a new experimental treatment you'll never use, so the adjusted price moderates. Meanwhile, your actual bank account shows the actual money leaving every month, and it's a lot more than the CPI suggests. The third trick is the owner's equivalent rent calculation. Housing is the largest expense for most American households. It should dominate the inflation index, but the BLS doesn't measure what you actually pay for housing. Instead, they survey homeowners and ask what they think they could rent their home for. This hypothetical rental value is called owner's equivalent rent, and it makes up about a quarter of the entire CPI calculation. Think about how absurd this is. The largest component of the inflation index isn't based on actual transactions. It's based on what homeowners imagine they could charge in rent. And homeowners systematically underestimate this number because they're not actually in the rental market. They don't know what rentals are going for. They don't update their estimates when the market moves quickly. The result is that housing inflation is permanently understated in the official numbers. When house prices doubled between 2000 and 2007, the CPI barely registered it. When rents exploded after 2020, the official inflation number lagged by over a year. Because the methodology was designed to smooth out housing costs, to prevent the real volatility in the market from showing up in the headline number. The fourth trick is geometric weighting. Before 1999, the CPI used a straightforward arithmetic calculation. If something went up in price, it increased the index proportionally to how much of your budget it represented. Simple, accurate, honest. Then they changed to geometric weighting, which automatically reduces the impact of items that increase in price faster than average. The mathematical justification is complex, but the practical effect is simple. Fast rising prices get downweighted, slow rising prices get upweighted. The index is structurally biased towards smaller numbers. An item that doubles in price doesn't double its impact on the index. It gets partially offset by the geometric formula. Why does any of this matter? Because the CPI isn't just an academic exercise. It determines real money. Social Security payments are adjusted based on CPI. If inflation is 3%, but the CPI shows 2%, retirees get 2% increases while their actual costs rise 3%. Over a decade, that compounds into massive purchasing power losses. Tax brackets are adjusted based on CPI. If real inflation exceeds official inflation, you get pushed into higher tax brackets without any real increase in income. The government collects more revenue without ever officially raising taxes. They call this bracket creep. It's theft by statistics. TIPS bonds, Treasury inflation-protected securities, pay interest based on CPI. Investors buy them thinking they're protected from inflation, but they're only protected from official inflation. If real inflation exceeds CPI by 2 percentage points, TIPS holders lose 2% of their purchasing power every year while being told they're breaking even. Now here's the question that should keep you up at night. If you measured inflation the way they did in 1980, before all these methodological changes, what would the number be? Economists who've done this calculation consistently get numbers between 7 and 10% annual inflation during periods when the official CPI showed 2 to 3%. That's not a small discrepancy. That's the difference between your standard of living slowly improving and your standard of living being cut in half over a decade. John Williams runs a website called Shadow Government Statistics, where he calculates inflation using the old methodology. His numbers are controversial. The BLS disputes them. Mainstream economists dismiss them as alarmist. But ask yourself this: does the official 3% inflation feel right to you? Does it match your experience at the grocery store, at the gas pump, at the doctor's office, when you pay your rent or mortgage? Most people, when asked, say their personal inflation rate feels much higher than the official numbers. They're not imagining things. They're experiencing the gap between CPI and reality. The government measures one thing and calls it inflation. You experience something else entirely. The defenders of the current methodology say it's more accurate, that substitution effects are real, that quality improvements should be accounted for, that geometric weighting better reflects consumer behavior. And they're not entirely wrong. There are reasonable arguments for some of these adjustments. But notice who benefits from every single change. Lower inflation numbers mean lower Social Security payments. Lower inflation numbers mean more bracket creep. Lower inflation numbers mean the Federal Reserve can keep interest rates lower for longer, which benefits the government by reducing the cost of servicing its debt. Every methodological change since 1980 has made the number smaller. Not one change has made it larger. What are the odds that every improvement in measurement methodology just happened to reduce the inflation figure? What are the odds that statisticians consistently found errors that overstated inflation and never found errors that understated it? 0. The odds are 0. The methodology changes weren't neutral improvements in accuracy. They were systematic adjustments designed to produce smaller numbers. Numbers that benefit the government. Numbers that reduce automatic payments. Numbers that hide the real erosion of purchasing power. And the people making these decisions aren't stupid. They know exactly what they're doing. The BLS is staffed with professional statisticians who understand the implications of every methodological choice. The Federal Reserve employs some of the best economists in the world. When they choose a measurement method that systematically understates inflation, they're not making an innocent error. They're making a policy choice, a choice to hide the true cost of monetary expansion, a choice to transfer wealth from savers and workers to borrowers and asset owners, a choice to make the government's fiscal position look better than it actually is. So what should you do with this information? First, stop believing headline inflation numbers. They're not measuring what you think they're measuring. When someone tells you inflation is 3%, mentally add 2 to 4 percentage points. That's closer to what you're actually experiencing. Second, adjust your financial planning accordingly. If you're saving for retirement, assuming 2% inflation, you're going to run out of money. If you're accepting wage increases that match CPI, your standard of living is declining. If you're holding bonds that pay CPI plus 2%, you're probably losing purchasing power. Third, own assets that benefit from real inflation. Real estate, commodities, equities, and companies with pricing power. The same inflation that erodes the value of your savings increases the nominal value of real assets. If you can't beat the lie, at least position yourself to benefit from the reality it's hiding. The inflation numbers they tell you are not real. They're a carefully constructed statistical artifact designed to minimize payments to ordinary people while maximizing the government's ability to borrow and spend. Every time you hear an official inflation number, remember that the methodology has been changed dozens of times, always in the same direction, always smaller, always benefiting the same interests. They're not hiding inflation because they're incompetent. They're hiding it because they can. Because most people don't understand how CPI is calculated. Because challenging the official numbers gets you labeled a conspiracy theorist. Because the lie is too useful to too many powerful people. Now you know how the trick works. The only question is what you're going to do about it.